So a man comes to Jesus and asks, "Who is my neighbor?" He was hoping he'd be excused from having to love specific people from specific tribes who held different cultural values. Like a lawyer, he was trying to cross-examine Jesus because Jesus had just challenged him with this. Matthew 22, 37 through 39, Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." These words from Jesus, they sound so simple, but why is following this command so hard to embody? Why is it that through our words and our actions, we continue to ask Jesus the question, "Who is my neighbor?" Hoping to escape from giving any form of love that would offer an advantage to those who we culturally disagree with. The reality is that we're immersed in a world of neighbors who exist on the spectrum of near infinite cultural differences. We share this world with human beings that we strongly, vehemently, even violently disagree with. I mean, one look around and the command to love our neighbor, it feels impossible. So here comes this final question in our You Asked For It series, and I'll tell you what, for today's question, you really asked for it. And here it is. Christianity and the culture wars. What's our role? Well, since the creation of the world, there have been countless culture wars. Even before Adam and Eve, there was the fall of Satan and his angels who were cast out of heaven for attempting to upend the culture of heaven. And that pattern of cultures warring against each other, it persists today. Neighbor against neighbor, imago Dei against imago Dei, and to what end? Each of us have been born into this multiverse of warring cultures, all of us subjected to the corruption and the conflict between them. You and I, we didn't choose to be born into American culture, white culture, black culture, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, or Indian culture. Small town culture, cancel culture, environmentally conscious culture, but here we are. There's this German philosopher, Martin Heidegger, who talks about the thrownness of life. It's the idea that we are thrown into existence, and here we are. I mean, every day a child is born into the effects of the culture wars that they took no part in creating. I'm Black and Hispanic, which comes with culture wars that were established well before I was born. Things like the war for equality and civil rights and affirmative action and immigration. And I'm married to a woman who's white, which stirs up cultural conflict in places that you wouldn't believe for reasons that preceded me. You and I, we weren't there to establish the parameters of many of the cultural battles that we subscribe to. 2024 being an election year is gonna reignite our nation's cultural differences. But none of us were around when the Democratic or Republican parties formed their ideals, which, by the way, completely flipped from their original ideals after the Civil War. Initially, the southern states were democratic slave-owning states which subscribed to limited government and this independent agrarian philosophy of Thomas Jefferson, while the northern states, who were primarily Republican-led, they subscribed to the principles of a centralized government and expanding immigration and social reform. Most of those initial political strategies, they have fully converted, but here we are heading towards 2024, fighting for our current platforms as if we gave birth to them ourselves, believing in our party lines as if God himself has blessed our man-made ideological boundaries. Now, just for a moment, close your eyes, and I want you to listen to what's been said with conviction from thought leaders and pastors about the morality of our political parties.
As we head into 2024, the culture wars are dominating the conversation right now as we continue to debate what kind of country we should become and how quickly that change should happen.
Is it possible to be a good Christian and also be a member of the Republican Party? And the answer is absolutely not. Those two things really are mutually exclusive.
You cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat in this nation. I don't care how mad that makes you. You get pissed off as you want to. You cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat in this nation. They are God-denying demons.
Now, if you're not a Christian, sure, absolutely, the Republican Party is the best place for you to go because it is a completely immoral, unethical garbage heap that doesn't care about anything or anyone unless you've got millions of dollars.
CNN can eat my dirty socks. You cannot be a Democrat and a Christian. You cannot. Somebody say amen.
We exist in worlds of extremes. These culture wars surgically dividing us, human against human, imago Dei against imago Dei, positioning us to, at a minimum, remain divided and at the edges foment hatred towards one another. So what are some of the culture wars that we've faced in our lifetime? Well, if you're 70 years old like my parents, then you've seen far more manifestations of these culture wars than I have. Ranging from the Vietnam War to the Civil Rights Movement and the War for Equality to Reagan's war on drugs. And if you're middle-aged like my 40-year-old self, then you've spent the late 90s and 2000s arguing abortion and gun policies, separation of church and state, privacy issues, recreational drug use and homosexuality. If you're my kids' age, elementary school through high school, you're finding yourself right in the thick of sexual education and critical race theory, identity politics, gun rights, abortion policies, cancel culture. Essentially, everything is a hot-button culture war today. We can't escape it, or should we? We can't abdicate our responsibility to engage with it. So again, Christianity and the culture wars, we're all steeped in this like kombucha. So what is our role? Well, let's start by breaking down 4 words in this question, 4 words that represent what we'll call a means to an end. Christianity, culture, war, and our role. And what do I mean by this? A means to an end. Well, like a vehicle, it's the method that we use to transport us to the place that we want to be. So what is Christianity? Christianity is a means to an end. It's the faith, the vehicle that leads us towards knowing Jesus. Culture is a means to an end. Culture makers design culture to produce the future that they desire. War is a means to an end. War is the servant of death. In its wake are ideas and cultures and humanity. For the life of the follower of Jesus, one of these things is protected at all costs. Ideas can die. Cultures can fade away. But humanity should remain. In our role, in this question, it's viewed as a means to an end, but there's a misperception here that we'll come back to later. But a role is a positioning or an assignment to alter, protect, or upend the things that impose oppositional forces against us. And so with all of this in mind, we could reframe the question, Christianity and the culture wars, what's our role? We could reframe it in this way. How does knowing Jesus produce a future that protects humanity at all costs? How can I help? Listen, I have to put knowing Jesus at the center of this question because Jesus is the filter that all of these means to an end pass through. Jesus is the only means, not just to an armistice, but the end of culture wars. And I'll be upfront with you, his way is not easy. It can be frustrating and so dissatisfying following Jesus. Sometimes in my flesh, I wish there was another way, a way that justifies my arrogance in thinking that I could fix everything if everyone would just listen to my 2 cents. But I'm compelled to follow the words and the actions of Jesus because I believe that the only way to understand what it means to love our neighbor is to follow the lived example of the one who commissioned us to do it. So what role does Jesus give us in these culture wars? Which wars do we choose to give our time and energy to? There are so many wars to contend with, and on the horizon are so many more that we've yet to encounter. It can be overwhelming, but Jesus gives us these beautiful strategies that are transferable. They're constant no matter the war, and that's what we'll focus on today. For today, we'll break it down in 3 ways. And the first thing that we'll learn from Jesus about our role in these culture wars is this. What we see from Jesus is that our adversary reveals our heart. And I'll say it again. Our adversary reveals our heart. Show me your enemy, and I'll show you your heart. Before we even begin to entertain the idea of engaging in a cultural battle, we have to place our motivations at the feet of Jesus, asking him to purify any desire or self-will that comes into conflict with his heart. Let's look at Luke 22:47 through 54 to gain understanding. Just before Jesus is betrayed, he's praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and it's late at night, and he's asking his followers to stay awake and pray with him, starting with verse 47. So while he was still speaking, there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" And when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" And one of them, Peter, struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this." And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple and the elders who had come out against him, "Have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness." Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter followed at a distance. Listen, our flesh, our earthly desires will gift us the blinded ability to wage war with the wrong adversary. In his heart, Peter thought that he was defending Jesus from Jesus' enemies. Peter assumed that his intentions were in alignment with Jesus' assignment. In Peter's heart, this new culture that Jesus was establishing needed to be protected at all costs, even if it meant taking the life of that servant. And so Peter, he raises his sword, intending to strike a fatal blow against who he thought was his enemy, but he was unsuccessful. His enemy, this man, is cut down, but he's not destroyed. And there's a deeply important lesson in this. Image bearers are not the enemy. When we raise our swords against the wrong things, we will never win the war. They may be cut down, but they will not be destroyed. It will always result in wasted energy that every time will be a swing and a miss. Peter's adversary in that moment revealed the fault in his heart. And when our hearts are not in alignment with Jesus, we'll find ourselves warring against the wrong adversary. And I'll say that again. When our hearts are not in alignment with Jesus, we'll tragically find ourselves warring against the wrong enemy. And Jesus said to Peter, and he's saying to us today, no more of this. Yeah, but how will the world know you if we don't cut them down, if we don't cut them off? No more of this. Yeah, but we have to attack. We can't let them have their way. No more of this. Yeah, but if they win, no more of this. In verse 53, Jesus turns and he points to the heart of the matter. He says to those who are about to take him and have him crucified, but this is your hour. And he calls it out, and the power of darkness. Jesus is saying, you're not my enemy. I see you here, but you are not my enemy. It's the power of darkness over you. This is why Jesus, he heals the servant's ear instead of joining in the fight with Peter against flesh and blood. This is what makes Jesus' actions so hard to follow. I mean, Jesus, you didn't just stop the fight. You offered healing and mercy to the side that was against you. And not just slightly against you, the side that wanted you to suffer. They wanted you dead. How could you acknowledge the power of darkness over them and still be so merciful and kind towards them? I mean, it was just an ear, so maybe just stop the fight, but leave it cut off. I mean, you know they're going to crucify you. You know that you're not going to get out of this. And listen, Jesus, none of us would have held it against you if you didn't heal him. But Jesus' adversary revealed his heart. Because Jesus' war has always been against the real enemy, the power of darkness. This clarity about his adversary, it gave Jesus the ability to love his neighbor even when they opposed him. And by they, I mean us. We who war and sin against him, you and I are offered mercy and love and patience and kindness and forgiveness instead of carnal retribution. And again, this can be so dissatisfying if you follow Jesus, because in today's world, we want him more than anything to overthrow the systems and cultures that conspire to cancel him. We'd raise our swords thinking we're helping him, but I'm not so sure that he'd give our post a like or a retweet or a share. I'm not so sure he'd endorse our methods. In our culture wars, we fight the wrong things when our hearts serve the will of the wrong king. Ephesians 6:12, it reminds us that we're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in heavenly places. So before we raise our sword of political correctness or arrogance or anger or pride, pause and consider these questions. Would Jesus offer kindness to the people we would cut down? What does my adversary reveal about my heart? Is my heart in alignment with the heart of Jesus? The second thing that Jesus teaches us about our role in these culture wars is the primacy of choosing human needs over human rights. Jesus himself should have been protected at all costs. He is righteousness itself. And so his rights should never have been violated. He had every right to go ballistic against every corruption, against every false culture, but he chose the difficult path of meeting our human needs over demanding his human rights. In Isaiah 53, 6-7, we read this prophecy about Jesus' method of dealing with the broken cultures of this world. It says this, all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is before its shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Well, you might be saying, that's unfathomable and amazing. I'm not Jesus. I've got way too much to say. Plus, Jesus didn't have Twitter or Facebook or Fox News or CNN or the Washington Post. We've got freedom of speech, and it's my right to say exactly what's on my mind because listen, arguing on social media, it saves lives and it converts people and it brings people together in peace and harmony, one tweet or X at a time. When my oldest daughter was 6 years old, over 11 years ago, she was in this soccer league that instituted a silent sidelines soccer game. The parents weren't even allowed to whisper. I'll tell you what, it was the worst 50 minutes of our lives. We had so much to say because our kids were at that stage where they had no idea how to play the game. They just run together in a tight ball wherever the ball went, kicking it everywhere, occasionally stopping to pick some grass or stare off in the distance or to talk to a friend while goals were being scored. And so on that silent day, our blood pressure was through the roof, and our kids would look over at us just confused, and they'd see us just wildly hand-waving and trying to encourage with these big expressions on our faces and wildly pointing, trying to get them to go where we wanted them to go, but silently because we couldn't speak, and it was so tough to be quiet. So I can't even imagine what it was like for Jesus to watch a world doing life so terribly. Just running around being dumb and restraining himself from not viciously shouting at us at the top of his lungs. He didn't entertain engaging in the shouting matches that we so eagerly engage in. And add to that, in verse 6, it says, "The Lord laid on him the iniquities of us all," our human needs superseding his human rights. On the cross, our human needs clearly provided for, the full demonstration of what it means to love God and our neighbor. Listen, the cross of Jesus speaks louder over all humanity than anything ever uttered by those who claim to know him. I can hear the sound of the cross over my life. You can hear the sound of the cross over your life, speaking so clearly, yet silent. The silence of a sacrificial action speaks louder than self-defense ever could. When we witness the example of the cross, we recognize that our greatest weapon in these culture wars, it takes a form that is foreign to this world: sacrificial love. And for the Christ follower, love withheld, it's not love. That's why human needs, they supersede human rights. Because we give even when we don't want to. That's so hard for me to give even when I don't feel like it, even when I don't want to. And so how do we do that? Sure, we're not going to take on the sins of the world, but how do we apply the ethic of placing human needs above human rights without demanding the right to slide our 2 cents in? I mean, why would I meet the needs of anyone who is actively against my views on identity politics? Why would I even consider going above and beyond to meet the needs of someone who obnoxiously hopes that fill-in-the-blank candidate gets elected? Why would I ever provide for the essential needs of my neighbors who just had an abortion? I'd rather give them a piece of my mind. But we're following Jesus, his words and his actions, considering what love requires, allowing his ethic to lead us towards the uncomfortable, unpopular places of meeting human needs, the need to experience the sacrifice of love, standing above our human right to withhold it. This has always been the heart of the Father. Even in the Old Testament, God used Joseph, a slave of Egypt, to see Egyptians flourish, showing them who he is. God used the unjust experiences of Daniel and his 3 friends brought into Babylonian captivity to see people in Babylon flourish. In the same way, God used the unjust experiences of Jesus to see the people who treated him unjustly find redemption and hope through him. I often wonder why it takes extreme tragedy for us to get to the place where human needs exceed human rights. I think of extremely tragic events like the fires in Hawaii and 9/11, and I think about how quickly human need surpasses human rights. When the building's burning and a rescue mission is in full swing, or when you're clearing through the rubble searching for survivors. In those moments, it's no longer about who the person you're saving voted for. You don't care about their sexual orientation or preferred pronouns. I mean, they could have posted all kinds of obscenities on social. They could be anti everything that you stand for. But what matters in those moments is that they're human beings in need of human kindness. I mean, in those instances, we witness Imago Dei, seeing the value in the Imago Dei of another. And then somewhere along the way, as the days from that tragedy pass, there's this tipping point, a return to normal things like these culture wars that cause people to behave so poorly against one another. And I have to ask myself, what happened? Well, for the follower of Jesus, that tipping point back to the normalcy of war, that tipping point never happens. Because like witnessing a dog return to its vomit, it's repulsive. I told you this wouldn't be easy. The principle of human needs over human rights isn't just challenging because culture wars are difficult, but because following the way of Jesus through these culture wars is difficult. So I ask you, just like I'm asking myself as I'm thinking about human needs over human rights, in what areas do you find yourself withholding love? What rights are you clinging to? What tipping points cause us to elevate my human rights, our human rights, over your human needs? Well, lastly, the third thing that Jesus teaches us about our role in these culture wars is this. Our role is a means to the beginning, not a means to an end. The beginning of relationship, not the end of connection. The beginning of peace, not the cause of agitation. Our role is to bring humanity back to God's original intention, to the beginning. As Christ followers never participate in anything that stands against that good intention. Jeremiah 6:16-17, this is what the Lord says. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you shall find rest for your souls. But you said, we will not walk in it. So I appointed watchmen over you and said, listen to the sound of the trumpet. But you said, we will not listen. Our role in these culture wars is to bring people back to that ancient path, back to where the good way is that God established even before the beginning, back to the good way that is only known through the example of the selflessness and sacrifice that we witness through the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. Every Christ follower is an appointed watchman, responsible for ensuring the way of love, that the way of love is seen and known, pointing humanity, even if the response is, we will not listen, back to Jesus through our actions, through our daily decisions to love our neighbors. So practically speaking, what does it look like to point people towards that ancient path, that good way? What do appointed watchmen do and say? Well, there's a watchman appointed by God that we're reminded of today. This weekend is the commemoration of Share the Dream Sunday. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream is one of the most important American speeches of the last 100 years. Delivered in Washington, D.C. 60 years ago on this weekend, Sunday, August 28th in 1963. And churches across the nation will share the message and the meaning of this historic moment in history. His life, it carried the message of love. It carried the message of conscious justice, freedom, perseverance, and hope, a teaching needed in the divided society that we face today. The life of Martin Luther King Jr., it gives all followers of Jesus both messages and mandates for ministry that are relevant to us today. Dr. King, he understood his role in the culture wars of his day. He fought for the beginning of relationship, the restoration of relationship, not the end of connection. He fought for the beginning of peace, not for the cause of agitation. He fought for the reinstantiation of God's original intention, not the desolation of it. His role in these culture wars was a means back to the beginning, not a means to an end. He followed Jesus' example, working diligently for the restoration of all things, even things that seemed insurmountable. He wasn't ignorant of the challenges. All throughout his mission, he was met by mobs violently shouting, "We will not listen. We will not walk in it." And even still, he was determined to do the work. In his I Have a Dream speech, he puts it so beautifully as he says this.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
We have always been created equal, created in the image of God. And our role is to remind the world of our original intention by offering dignity and humanity despite our differences. Our role is to bring the eternal, never-changing, culture-restoring kingdom of heaven to earth. So pay attention and remember, our adversaries reveal our heart. Human need surpasses human rights. And our role is a means to the beginning, not a means to an end. These are three transferable things that we consider before we engage any battle, any culture war. And one day, when these culture wars have ended, when we've laid our weapons down, we'll join together almost in disbelief. And in the words of MLK, be free at last. Free from our wars. Free to know a humanity at peace. Free from the bondages that keep us from love of neighbor. Free at last.
Hey, wait, before you go, 3 things. First, consider becoming one of Cornerstone Fellowship's financial partners. Your donations will ensure that you'll be able to continue enjoying helpful and hopefully life-changing messages like the one you just watched. And then number 2, please share the link to this message with anyone who you know needs it or will be blessed by it. or by posting the link to your own personal social media platforms, all of them. And finally, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you'll be alerted whenever we post more content. Thanks for watching.